Even though I am the agricultural counselor for the Northeast China for the United States, none of what I share today is official government statement. It only reflects my experience and my impressions. And I hope that my third thing, what I share, is that it's constructive and useful. And so, as a saying in another association, we often say, please take what you like and leave the rest. Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about is the evolution of lay Buddhism in China over the last 30 years. And like Dr. Kaninga, I completely agree with you. The press and what they see of Buddhism in China and what Buddhism is all about are two different stories. And that is the key thing. What is the story? What is the truth that we're dealing with? After all, Buddha told stories, and then they became logic and disposition. But it begins with story, it begins with experience. And so as a Buddhist, I realize we live in a world of two truths. The immanent truth that we live in a world caught up in samsara, and so is China. There, people are beginning to emerge and recover from the destruction of monasteries, sutras, and the abuse of monastics and believers for 30 years, beginning in the 1950s. However, at the same time, in China, there is an increasing awareness that Buddhism is valuable for its ethics, cultural heritage, and aesthetics. However, the trauma that Buddhists have gone through, as well as society has gone through, that has not yet been brought to full consciousness. But they do realize that there needs to be a remedy that deals with what Buddhism has suffered, and it must be remedified physically, intellectually, and socially. These are the terms that I hear. Now, from the perspective of transcendent truth, there is an ultimate reality free of obstacles and suffering. However, walking that road, even now you're fully committed to it, walking that road involves facing and overcoming obstacles to wisdom and obstacles to compassion. And thus, contemporary Chinese are discovering new problems as they try to deal and recover from the old problems. These include sexual and financial scandals concerning the Sangha and the crass commercialization of prominent temples by local governments so they can make money. These stories have come to light, and every month, really, if you follow not the newspapers, but the WeChat, you will get more and more stories or revelations. Less dramatic, but still very common, are the charlatans who wear monks' robes, pretending to be monks, begging for handouts, and something more subtle. Buddhism has become almost too popular. So now when you go to a bookstore, that book is pirated from someone else. That survey of temples in the city of Loyang is actually garbage research. But the average reader doesn't know that. There's just money to be made in selling Buddhism. Okay. But it's not only at the level of malas, this will give you long life. It's even very subtle at intellectual levels. However, I get questioned all the time by Westerners. How is Buddhism doing in China? It's like, how can you answer such a question? It's like, I could talk to you about what's a good restaurant, but really, how healthy is Buddhism in China? And even though I'm formally trained as an economist, and and statistics is what I love the most. But trying to give a real answer is what we say in statistics, garbage in, garbage out. If we try to stuff bad data into a bad formula, you're going to get an erroneous result. While identifying the number of believers in temples may be a very straightforward process for Catholic and Protestant communities, that this paradigm is based on Christian structures. After all, what do we mean by a Buddhist? Let's get to the deeper question. After all, we here in this room all know we can practice the 6 paramitas, our meditation, study sutras, and not have to belong to any particular community, or you could belong to 20, right? So this idea that you belong to a building and therefore you are Buddhist, that is not a satisfying approach. After all, I believe what makes one a Buddhist, at the minimum, is that the person has recognized the law of karma and has made a commitment to observe their thoughts, speech, and acts and create good karma. At the very minimum. There may be more levels and vows, but at least in that person's consciousness, and of course, the sense that the Buddha is the great teacher, but that to me is the essence. But surveys don't ask that kind of question. And after all, in Buddhism, with no belief in a soul, there is no need to encourage conversion. And if there is no conversion ceremony, there is no need to make a formal attestation. What is more important in Buddhist life is not physical structures or declarations of faith, but the recognition of the need for good teachers who can skillfully and guide and develop their intentions. Now, over the past 40 years, I have traveled throughout 25 provinces of China, and I have seen tremendous change. I'm seeing all manner of Buddhist gatherings. I've seen Vinaya and ordination classes for Tibetan nuns in Gansu and Yunnan. I have gone to the funeral rites for the abbot of Kungbun Monastery, who just passed, just literally the day before my arrival in Qinghai. How shall we say, Amdo. I have seen lay people offering fire pujas in Kunming, the release of birds and fish in all kinds of cities and towns throughout all of China. I've seen fundraising drives for the survivors of the Sichuan and Yushu earthquakes. I even met this one fellow in Xiamen in Fujian province who innovated a lay society where young people, all lay, they put on the casas and then they go to the homes of dying people and they chant prayers for the crossing over. And they have several goals. One is to comfort the living, 2 to comfort the passing, and the third kind of is a teaching tool. What is Buddhism all about? Relieving suffering by relieving suffering. So there's a lot of innovation going on. And in my phone, I couldn't keep track of it all. I have about 30 WeChat groups from different monasteries. And if I was to collect every one, my phone wouldn't speak. It's just thousands. And I don't use that number loosely. It is that order of magnitude. And there are young monks, young meaning in their 40s, they grew up after the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 1977, but for 11 years, all universities, all schools were closed, and people were harassed and tortured, and I could go on, but that's another talk. But now the young people are saying, what am I living for? Because my family has alcoholism, divorce, I'm making money, I'm unhappy. I'm still unhappy. And these lectures are really quite compelling. They're really dealing with today's world, today's people, and today's options. They're not about fixing the government, but they're all, okay, what choice can you make in this world of samsara? To give you a sense of the change, in 1987, I went to the Mindan grottos in Dhaka, dry area in central China. They go back 1,500 years. And all I could see were lots of local Chinese tourists and Chinese tour buses. This is their first little outside of their hometown trip. They may take one photo because nobody had cameras. So it was not about personal pilgrimage. The next day I visited Zhongshan Temple in the center of the city of Dhaka. And I see this monk, and he's just slouched. And there's another monk, just kind of like, you have focus. You would not be a monk from 1987. So these two guys are like, how many denial rules are not really being followed? And then I noticed there's an old monk in his 70s. And I get out, I found one hawker of incense, off of my incense, making it go. And I watch the older monk watching me. Then he waits for the two shiftless monks to wander off. He wanders off. And that monk calls me up and says, where did you learn to do that? I didn't want him to be taken away. He said, I said, I learned it from my teachers in Taiwan. Oh. And he says, I was not allowed to teach my monks that. He said, no, my monks don't know that. I said, really? And I said, doesn't the Chinese Constitution allow freedom of religion? And he said, oh, I'm not allowed to teach. So we both sat. But I was grateful that even though he could not practice fully in what we think practice is, he still chose to be in those. He still chose to be a monk when it was not easy. Now, because of time, I have other stories, but I'm going to fast forward. In the mid-'80s, Buddhism started to become a little acceptable because of top ethics, right and wrong. And you could see on Chinese TV the stories of this mad monk that would get drunk to reveal cheaters and lawyers. And the story of the journey to the west, of the story of the Tripitaka master who was with the Monkey King. And those telenovelas were popular with everybody, from beggars to Beijing professors. This was the stuff of life. The Chinese said, we are one, but don't forget where you come from. This was talking to the self. Then books started coming out in the 90s, and now I can go into a bookstore, whereas 30 years ago, Buddhist Publication Society, what's that? A pamphlet on how to offer incense? That sends you to jail. Now, you could go into temples throughout China, and there are sutras for giving away, for fulfilling karma, they call it. They have, you can get biographies of monks. You can get histories of individual temples. You can, you want Vinaya study? What language? Do you want it Tibetan or Mandarin or classical? It's all there. They're reprinting everything. Of course, they're not telling the truth about how some monks were abused, but the works are now available. You can now go into a bookstore, which 30 years ago there was nothing on religion, and now there's 3,000 titles on Buddhism. So it's an amazing change. And now the temple where I go to in Shenyang, Huguo Si, it is a revived temple from about 1990. It's Vajrayana. It actually dates to 1636. But they just opened up a huge library that will be about triple the size of this room. They have put out marble slabs for making Tibetan prostrations. You could make choral or circuits around the temple. They have their own publication house. And so they're putting out their own books and commentaries. It's not just reprints, but new thought, new ideas. And they also have their own website. And they've even asked some local Tibetans to teach the monks better Tibetan, and they're teaching Tibetan to the locals. Last year, because of the commercialization in China, it was so bad. Temple tickets were like $30 a piece. You had to take a trolley. They were turning them into theme parks. And hawkers selling incense. I felt like I was watching something from Saturday Night Live. There'd be a bundle of incense, each one 3 feet long, like a bundle of red rockets. And oh, you need this for good karma. And they would just prey on people's guilt or ignorance. And even some temples even created stock offerings. I am not kidding you. You could buy stocks in temples on the Shanghai stock market. So last year, the government heard that, and they passed a law. China, it's called it's a long one. Some opinions on the commercialization of improving the administration of Buddhism and Taoism with respect to the problems of commercialization. And within 6 months, as I travel a lot for my job, gate tickets went from $20 to 20 cents. More free books, no tour bus groups in the temples selling superstition. A lot of temples are now completely free. Of course, in getting rid of a lot of this other commercialization. Some are doing it faster than others, but it is taking place. So there is a feedback loop between lay people, the Sangha, and the different levels of the government. And let me just wrap with, whereas 30 years ago, when I would just see basically tourists and lovers visiting the temples and parks of China, now you can see all kinds of spiritual disposition. The visitors, the pilgrims, are pious. Some go to welcome the exercise. Others are working on a practice given to them by their gurus. And all kinds of attitudes I can see. They're curious, exploratory, they're earnest, they're devout. And whatever the reason or disposition, whatever's that catalyst that brought them to the temple, they're not coming and they're staying. They're choosing to learn, and they're choosing to practice, and they're choosing to look for masters. And that, to me, sounds like a wonderful lesson for us to do. So, with that, we'll go.